Today we'll be covering the topic assertiveness training, जिसके ऊपर एक हम लोगों ने ट्रेनिंग कैरी आउट करवाई थी on 30th September 2021. ठीक है, ड्यू टू शॉर्टेज ऑफ टाइम एंड लॉट ऑफ अदर इश्यूज काफ़ी लोगों की ये जो ट्रेनिंग थी मिस हो गई थी, एंड इन ऑर्डर टू कंपनसेट फॉर दैट हम लोग जो हैं एक क्विक रिव्यू ऑफ द ट्रेनिंग वो अपलोड कर रहे हैं. ठीक है, so assertiveness. I am Amna Ijaz. I've done Masters in Clinical Psychology from NUST, and I'm currently teaching as a lecturer in the Department of Psychology at Foundation University Rawalpindi campus. Assertiveness is an area जिसके ऊपर मैंने खुद भी काफ़ी काम किया है, and I think this is very important to understand. ठीक है, so let's define some of the objectives that we have when it comes to assertiveness and in this particular training. ठीक है, सबसे पहला ऑब्जेक्टिव ये है कि हम आइडेंटिफाई कर सकें कि हमारा अपना कम्युनिकेशन स्टाइल कैसा है. Secondly, to define what communication styles are, how many types there are, and what is assertiveness. Learning to differentiate between the different communication styles, and lastly, some specific tips on how to be assertive. Okay, so what is a communication style? A communication style is the way in which we interact and exchange information with others. किसी भी तरीके से जब हम लोगों के साथ किसी तरह का भी ताल्लुक कायम करते हैं, हम उनके साथ इंटरेक्शन करते हैं, तो we define it as a communication style. इंटरेक्शन जो होती है, why is this important कि हम communication styles को study करें? This is because in the majority of our lives, what we do is कि हम we spend our days and our lives navigating the social scene, right? It can be a workplace, it can be your home environment, it can be with your friends, it can be an outing, but most of the time you are going to be interacting with someone or somebody else, right? And how you interact with that person is going to determine कि आपका communication कितना अच्छा है, how well are you able to get your point across, how do you interact and exchange information with other people. And this can be a source of comfort to you, or if there are ongoing problems in that area, then this can be a major source of stress. Now research has shown कि ऐसे लोग जो कि अपने rights के लिए खुद stand up नहीं करते हैं, जो routinely अपने जो needs होती हैं उनको communicate नहीं कर पाते, who have difficulty in asserting themselves, they are usually more vulnerable to depression, or they are very likely that other people are going to take advantage of them. Okay? All right. So here's a quick test for you to help you understand what your communication style is. Okay? There are 5 situations given here. 2 of these situations are about your interactions with strangers. 3 of these interactions are how you deal with people who are relatively close to you, such as your friends or your siblings. Okay? Now, it is a lot of people will behave differently in different settings, but when we are looking to identify our common communication pattern, what we are looking at is how do we typically respond. Okay? Typical means your most usual behavior, right? So what you have to identify here is कि if you were just being yourself without being conscious कि this is an assertiveness training, you're just put in that scenario, तो आप कैसे react करोगे? I'm going to read out the scenarios. आप अपने ज़हन में सोच लें. You can just note down the answers for yourself, ताकि जिस वक्त हम आगे communication styles के बारे में पढ़ें, तो आप identify कर सको कि कौन सा communication pattern है जो आपके ऊपर fit बैठ रहा है. ठीक है? So the number 1 scenario is you have made your payment at a grocery store, but after walking out, you realize that you are short 100 and 150 rupees. ठीक है? So in this scenario, what would you do? Your second scenario is you ordered fries and you said no ketchup. But when your fries come, they are loaded with ketchup. How would you respond? The third scenario is that you made plans about a week ago, that you would be watching Spider-Man Homecoming, but at the very last minute, your friend insists that they want to watch Twilight instead. How would you respond? All right, the next scenario is that you just sat down to relax after a long day at the university. And as soon as you sat down, your sibling comes in and tells you to take them to the market. How would you respond? And the last scenario, your teacher gave you specific instructions that the assignment was to be done individually, but now your friend has been bugging you to share your work. How would you respond? Once you have written down all the answers to the following given scenarios, just take a moment to reflect. What do you see? Is there a pattern that's coming up again and again? Okay. Now let's move on to defining the different communication styles. Usually there are around 4 commonly identified communication styles. There are some researchers and authors who give us 5 different communication styles. These are commonly identified as passive, aggressive, passive-aggressive, manipulative, and assertive. Let's go over these styles one by one. What is the passive communication style? Passive communication style is also known as the submissive communication style or the people pleasing type. ठीक है, जो passive style होता है इसमें हमें commonly क्या चीजें नजर आती हैं? The person is self-effacing, which means they tend to put themselves kind of down और दूसरे को build up करते हैं. They are conflict avoidant and usually very easygoing. In their day-to-day interactions, they tend to take a step back and let other people who are more aggressive or more assertive, they let those people lead the way. Individuals who have a passive style of communication may find it difficult to effectively express themselves. अगर उनकी कोई need होगी, or if they don't agree with something, they might have a difficult time expressing it. And the key feature, which I think would define the passive style, is that they want to avoid confrontation at all costs. I would like you to take a moment here and think about someone in your life. That can be yourself and it can be anybody else that is close to you, or maybe somebody you have seen on a fairly regular basis that you might think have a passive style of communicating. All right. The next style that we have is the aggressive style. Aggressive style, as the name indicates, is somewhat hostile, threatening, and it usually comes from a place where the person wants to win at all costs, right? The key driving factors behind a person who is operating in an aggressive manner could be that they believe that their words are the most important or the only important part of a conversation, which means that they don't care what anybody else has to say. This way of communicating, where you are thinking that your words are the only things that matter, it can result in other people feeling belittled. They might feel like they've been streamed or bulldozed over, and they may feel intimidated. Right? ये धौंस जमाने वाला style होता है. And this kind of style, if you put somebody who's aggressive against somebody who's also somewhat aggressive or assertive, or even if they're passive aggressive, this can lead to somewhat reactive hostility. So we all have somebody in our lives जो जिस सिचुएशन में जाता है वहां पे कोई ना कोई लड़ाई स्टार्ट हो जाती है, या there's an argument or there's tantrums or there's yelling or something like that going on. So I would once again invite you all to think about somebody, and that somebody can be yourself, right? We need to be conscious that our communication styles are determined by our environments, right? So we can be passive and we can be aggressive, or we can be passive aggressive, right? The point of this exercise is to help us identify कि हमारा typical style कैसा है. So I would like you all to identify one person from your life who may have the aggressive style. All right. So the next style that we have here is the passive aggressive style. The passive aggressive style combines aspects from both the passive style of communication and the aggressive style of communication. What's happening here is that on the surface, they may appear to be passive. However, there's a lot of anger or aggression that's simmering right beneath the surface, right? So outwardly, they may appear sweet and easygoing, but usually there's a lot of anger and resentment that's suppressed on the inside. And that kind of anger and resentment can come out in the form of sarcasm, taunts, being very patronizing, starting rumors about somebody else, using it to gossip about somebody, going behind their back, engaging in behaviors like leg pulling. And usually this passive aggressive style of behavior can be very toxic in group settings. So once again, I would like you all to think about somebody in your life who appears to be sweet on the surface but has done something that's of a very underhanded or aggressive nature. So if we can identify somebody like that in our lives, that would be great. All right. So our next style is the manipulative style. The manipulative style is the style that uses cunning, deceit, and influence to control others. Manipulation means using others or controlling others to do things your way, right? And in order to achieve that, they're using a lot of हम जो उर्दू में बोलते हैं इसको चालाकी, ठीक है? So चालाकी को यूज करते हुए, अपना इन्फ्लुएंस यूज करते हुए, धोखेबाजी यूज करते हुए वो दूसरों को अपना मकसद अचीव करने के लिए इस्तेमाल करेंगे. And how do we identify somebody who's manipulative? Well, for one thing, they rarely say what they mean. And instead, what they do is they would bury their real goals in layers and layers of obfuscation to get their way without the other person even realizing it. So there will be a lot of plans, a lot of tricking, a lot of not saying exactly what they wanted, but trying to convince you that you need to do something that will ultimately benefit them. And this kind of thing is characterized as being insincere and patronizing. Patronizing because they are not respecting the people jinko wo manipulate kar rahe. Those people don't matter to them. All they are pawns in a game, right? So obviously, if a person is constantly engaging in a manipulative style, this is going to lead to a lot of mistrust. Okay, so now that we have identified those common styles, we have the last style, the one that we will be focusing on, and that is the assertive style. So assertiveness was initially identified in 1949 by Salter as a personality trait, right? A personality trait that some people possessed and others didn't. But later on, it was redefined as a trait that everybody had, and it was identified that everybody was capable of being assertive because this was a way of expressing their rights and their needs. So what assertiveness is? It's basically an interpersonal style that bases its decision to act, think, and feel in a manner which is respectful to others as well as to oneself, right? So the initial or the underlying principle here is not to put ourselves down or to put other people down, but rather to lift both of us up and treat us as equals, as people worthy of being respected, people worthy of making their own decisions and having the right to act, feel, and think in ways that are suited to them, right? So what being assertive means is having the capacity to make requests, to actively agree or disagree, to express both positive and negative personal rights and feelings, to initiate, maintain, or disengage from conversations, to take a stand for oneself without attacking anybody else in the process. Now, this definition is very comprehensive and it covers almost all the things that fall under the assertiveness style or assertive style of communication. There are some underlying principles that I want everybody who's watching this to be aware of when it comes to assertiveness. See, assertiveness comes from a place of respect. Assertiveness is not coming from a place where we think we are better than someone else or we think others are better than us. We respect both ourselves and everybody else around us, regardless of their standing in the society. They can be a child, they can be an adult, they can be an adolescent, they can be your age mates. Every single person, educated, uneducated, deserves respect, deserves the right to be respected, right? So when we're coming from a place of respect, we will not bully others into agreeing with us, and we will not let others bully into agreeing with them. We will understand that if we agree or disagree with someone else, that is not in any way an insult to someone else and is in no way disrespecting anyone else. Yet, we will also realize that if we choose to agree, we are doing it of our own free will, and we are exercising our right to say yes to a request, right? So this is important to understand. A lot of people think that by being assertive, we are learning to be rude, which is absolutely not true. Actually, by being assertive, we are learning to be respectful to ourselves and to others. Okay? All right, so now let's get to comparing some of the basic styles. Now here I have compiled a list of the three basic styles, right? The passive style, the assertive style, and the aggressive style. Passive and aggressive and manipulative behaviors fall within or somewhere between the spectrum between passive and aggressive, right? So we can kind of guess where a person who is passive aggressive would lie at least apparently, or one who is manipulative, where would they lie at? But these three basic styles are very clearly compared or comparable. So on the left side of the table, I have listed the dimensions on which we are making the comparisons. And on the right side, I have listed down the three different behaviors. And we are, easily comparing them side by side to see what differences will we see in passive, assertive, or aggressive behavior. So characteristics of the behavior first and foremost. Passive behavior ignores or does not express one's own rights, needs or desires. मेरी क्या ख्वाहिश है, मेरा क्या हक है, मेरी क्या ज़रूरत है, मैं उसको इजहार नहीं करूँगी. In contrast, assertive style will express my own rights, my own needs, my desires, right? The aggressive behavior is also going to do the same thing. They're going to express their rights, but there's one key difference between assertive and aggressive behavior. Assertive behavior or person who is communicating assertively will not express their rights by bullying or putting down others. ये किसी का हक नहीं मारेंगे. लेकिन जो aggressive behavior है, that's going to come at the cost of other people. So if there are three things, right, for three people, a passive behavior would be, I don't need this. ये आप दोनों रख लो, in order to avoid a potential confrontation. Assertive behavior would be, this, I will just take what's mine and you can take yours. Aggressive behavior would be, I want all of this. Usually aggressive behavior and passive behavior occur side by side. if one of the people in an interaction is aggressive, it can give rise to passive behavior. And we see this kind of dynamic very commonly in our day-to-day lives. There is one aggressor and there is one enabler, a person with passive behavior who just keeps suppressing themselves in order to please someone who is aggressive. So they constantly have their rights taken away from them by the aggressor. Whereas assertive behavior would respect the rights of the person who is passive as well as the person who is aggressive and still stand their ground. This is mine and I will take what belongs to me. Right? So इसमें कोई गलत चीज़ नहीं है. If I say कि मेरी चीज़ है and I want this, right? या कि मेरा हक है and I don't want anybody stepping on that line, right? This isn't wrong. This is actually within my rights. But a lot of us have trouble doing that. Okay. The second thing is passive behavior permits others to infringe on their rights. And usually this is coming from a place of confrontation avoidance or conflict avoidance, right? Because they believe if other people can take the rights, that would lead to somehow no fighting or lack of confrontation or no arguments, then they would be happily giving up their rights, right? Assertive behavior, on the other hand, is standing up for the legitimate rights in a way that others' rights are not violated. I can stand for my rights without stepping on another person's. Aggressive behavior, on the other hand, is an inappropriate outburst or a hostile overreaction with the intent to humiliate or to get even or to put others down. So the intent behind aggressive behavior is not respect or क्या कहते हैं, एक genuine concern for their own rights, but rather it's to exact revenge or to humiliate the other person, right? So it's coming from a place of anger. Okay, so people who engage in passive behavior are usually emotionally dishonest with themselves. Even if they are feeling anger, even if they are feeling negative emotions, they might deny it, right? And their way is very indirect or inhibited. घुमा के बात करना, लंबी सी तमहीद मानना, अगर रिक्वेस्ट स्टेट करनी है तो going around in circles before coming to the point, or using a very manipulative kind of a style. Assertive behavior is emotionally honest, direct, and expressive. So there is expression where there needs to be expression, and it's not going around in circles but just going straight to the point. Aggressive behavior is emotionally honest. However, it is expressive and direct at the expense of other people. So I can say, I don't agree with this, or I can say, you are wrong. Both of these things are saying the same thing, right? I don't agree with what you are saying is taking responsibility of my words and not accusing the other person for expressing something that's different from mine. Whereas if I say you are wrong and I am right, I am creating a power dynamic here. I'm putting the other person down and trying to prove myself right. Right? So my expression is direct, but it's also targeted and can be humiliating to the other person. It can intimidate them and it can definitely infringe on their rights. It's blaming and accusatory. Okay? All right. Passive behavior is usually self-denying, whereas assertive behavior is self-enhancing and it's also persistent. Aggressive behavior is purely self-enhancing. The benefit is only to the self with no concern for the others. Passive behavior is concern for the others with no self-concern. Assertive behavior is a balance between the two. All right. Passive behavior allows others to choose for the person, or you make the choice for me. Assertive behavior is choosing for ourselves what we want to do. Aggressive behavior is choosing for others, not only for myself, I want this, but you are going to do this. Okay? All right. So if a person engages in either passive, aggressive, or assertive behavior, what are their emotions going to be like? People engaging in passive behavior tend to experience a lot of hurt, a lot of anxiety, or disappointment in themselves, right? मुझे stand लेना चाहिए था, मैं ऐसे कह सकती थी, मुझे यूं नहीं करना चाहिए था, पता नहीं क्या हो जाएगा. There's a lot of hurt and anger and a lot of anxiety coming in. A person who is engaging in aggressive behavior is very likely to feel angry. That's a very key emotion in aggressive behavior. But there's also like a righteousness to them. They believe they were right? And that's why they would be so aggressive or angry in their communication. And there can also be a lot of guilt because once they have aggressed, they might realize we crossed a line, and that would lead to them feeling guilty. And in a lot of cases, that guilt is going to give rise to another bout of anger because why should I feel guilty when I did nothing wrong? Okay. And then there's assertive behavior where the person is feeling confident, self-respecting, and feels good about self at the time or later. All right. So what's the outcome when we engage in these behaviors? The person may indirectly achieve desired goals. Passive behavior में अगर वो engage करते हैं, they may not directly say कि उनका goal क्या है, but by manipulating others or by giving indirect hints or by livening themselves up with someone who is already doing what they want to be done, they may indirectly get to their desired goal. Assertive behavior will achieve their desired goal if they set their mind to it. Aggressive behavior will again achieve their desired goal, but only by hurting other people. So what's the payoff? Why do people continue to engage in passive behavior versus aggressive behavior versus assertive behavior? There has to be something that is giving them some sort of benefit. So there is some payoff in passive as well as aggressive style. So what's the payoff in passive style? Well, for one thing, they avoid all unpleasant and risky situations. They avoid conflicts, they don't get into confrontations, and even if they don't get their needs met, they are achieving that particular thing. However, because they are constantly denying their needs, this can lead to a lot of anger, a feeling of worthlessness, a feeling that they are taken for granted, treated as a doormat, not respected, etc. A person who is engaging in aggressive behavior will have an emotional outburst, right? And they will be like, at least I got even with this, right? Also, they get what they want pretty much because they're so aggressive or angry. People kind of give in to them in order to avoid confrontation or just to keep peace in a situation. So they get what they want. They also get like an emotional higher ground कि मैं सही था इसलिए मुझे गुस्सा आया and everybody else is wrong. So they also have like that emotional justification and they also get even. So there's no like lack of revenge, right? When we engage in assertive behavior, we end up feeling good. We end up feeling valued by ourselves and by others. We feel better about ourselves. We are usually more honest and get our needs met. We also get most of the things done without engaging into confrontation or without getting run over by somebody else. So what are the other person's feeling when someone is engaging in passive behavior or aggressive behavior? If I'm interacting with you and I'm very passive about it, so this can lead to the other person feeling guilty because they might feel like they have insulted the other person, or maybe they might have done something to bully or intimidate this person. There can be a lot of superiority involved as well. This feeds into if somebody has like a grandiose bent or somebody who has like a need for attention, that need gets fed very well by somebody engaging in passive behavior. And there can also be a lot of frustration. Why? Because people who are passive are not very open or direct about what they want. So a person can feel frustrated. Why won't you just say what you need, right? So this can be the other person's feeling. If a person is engaging with you and they are being aggressive, what might you experience in that scenario? Well, you might feel hurt, for one thing. You might feel humiliated. You might feel afraid. Yeah? You might feel a threat to yourself. There might be a lot of anger. You might also feel victimized, right? So these emotions are very common in the person when you are engaging with someone who is aggressive. When we are engaging with someone in an assertive manner, the feelings of both parties would be respect and value. We can talk, we can disagree, we can express our negative emotions, but it will be done in a way where neither of us feel disrespected. So we will feel heard, and we might say, okay, maybe we don't agree, but it wasn't insulting, right? So usually the feelings of the other person is actually feelings of respect and value. So what are the verbal tells of someone who is passive? I'm sorry, लेकिन मैं आपको तंग नहीं करना चाहता था, लेकिन मुझसे ऐसा हो गया, you know, like I mean ऐसा हो सकता है, बाज़-औक़ात ऐसा होता है, थोड़ा-सा घुमा फिरा के बात करने वाला अंदाज़, apologetic words, veiled meanings, hedging, आहिस्ता से, अगर हम इस तरह ना करें तो, suggestion के तौर पे. Failure to come to the point. You want to get from point A to point B, but you're going around and around without coming to the point. Failure to say what you really mean, right? And just going around in circles. That's the trademark of someone, or the verbal tell of someone who is engaging in passive behavior. Aggressive behavior. Loaded words, accusation, descriptive and subjective terms, you messages. तुमने ऐसा किया, हमेशा तुम्हारी वजह से ऐसा होता है, मैं आज इसलिए लेट हुआ, मुझे तुमने सुबह जगाया क्यों नहीं था, और कोई काम तुमसे सही होता है, accusatory. ऐसा कर सकते हो, तुम सजेस्ट तो कर रहे हो, लेकिन ये करेगा कौन, right? So there's a lot of you messages, there are a lot of loaded words, heavy words, accusatory words, and you messages, and a lot of subjective terms. Tum selfish ho. Right? Now, their definition of selfish would be very different from what selfish actually means. Assertive behavior. If a person is engaging in assertive behavior, what kind of words, statements they would use? Well, for one thing, they wouldn't be using accusatory or you messages. तुम्हारी वजह से ऐसा हुआ, तुम कभी सही नहीं करते हो, तुमने यूं ना किया होता तो मुझे गुस्सा मत आता. I feel angry. मुझे लगता है कि मैं ये नहीं कर सकती. मुझे ये चीज़ सही नहीं लग रही है. मैं आज सुबह लेट उठी थी, इसलिए मैं वक्त पर नहीं पहुंच सकी. Taking responsibility for my words and for my actions. We're using a lot of objective words. मुझे तुम्हारा ये रवैया अच्छा नहीं लगा. Not that तुम्हारे रवैये में बदतमीजी है, तुम बदतमीज हो, but मुझे तुम्हारा रवैया बदतमीज लगा है. So there is a clear-cut distinction between the person and their behavior, and there is a lot of objectivity surrounding it. We would describe the behavior and not the person, right? Direct statements. We wouldn't beat around the bush. And honest statements of feelings. I like this. I don't like this. I agree. I don't agree. Not going around like, I don't think this will work. I think this should be done like this. So straightforward statements. Without, sounding like the other person is wrong, or making it so that the other person would feel humiliated, but rather being respectful in the manner we convey our words in. Right? So there's a lot of non-verbal. जब भी हम communication की बात करते हैं तो there's one verbal aspect to it, but then there's also a lot of non-verbal aspect to it. And non-verbally, there's a lot of things associated with all three styles, right? So let's describe the general behavior and then we can go into the specifics. So generally, passive behavior is relying on actions instead of relying on words, right? And they will believe कि हमारे action से कोई guess कर ले कि हमारे emotions क्या हैं, हमारे mind में क्या है, हमारी requirements क्या हैं, हमारी needs क्या हैं, without us explicitly stating कि this is what we want or this is what we need. Assertive behavior tends to be very assertive and attentive in their listening. There's generally a very assured manner, right? They don't hesitate. There's not a lot of like if we see someone who is very passive, right? You might get the feeling that this person is nervous, right? But you won't get this feeling with someone who is assertive. You will get the feeling that this person is assured and confident in their manner. But their confidence or their surety isn't coming in the form of intimidation. A person who's aggressive will deliberately overplay their strength. They will try to make themselves look bigger, stronger than they are. Their style would be very putting down, very flippant, dismissive, or sarcastic. So, this kind of a style can humiliate the person, make them seem like they are stupid for trying to do something, make them feel like, it's their fault that they did something wrong, etc., etc. Okay. So, non-verbal behavior, voice. Passive behavior voice would be weak, hesitant, soft, sometimes wavering. Uh, their eyes would be averted, downcast, teary, or pleading, requesting. Their stance would be leaning for support or twisted like this. Posture would be stooped, shrunken, saccade, and excessive head nodding. Hands all fluttery and fidgety or clammy and rubby. Feet shuffling, restless motion, tucked under the chair, swinging back and forth. A person who's aggressive, expressionless, narrowed, cold, staring but not really seeing you or seeing through you kind of a gaze. Voice tense, shrill, loud, shaking with anger, extremely or deadly quiet, demanding or authoritative, right? क्या मतलब है इस चीज का? Something like this. Hands on hip, feet apart, that kind of a stance. Their posture would be rigid, stiff, and completely invading a person's personal space. Hands clenched, abrupt gestures, finger pounding, finger pointing, fist pounding kind of a thing, right? And feet tapping firmly on the ground, firmly planted. आप all right, so feet shuffling, restless motions. Okay, so aggressive would be feet tapping and firmly planted on the ground. Assertiveness, voice would be firm or well modulated. It would suit the environment in which the person is speaking. So if the voice needs to be loud, it will be loud without being shrill or without punching against the eardrums, right? Eyes open, frank, direct eye contact without staring. We are not threatening another person, but we want to communicate, and that's why we are maintaining eye contact. Stance is well balanced, straight on and at ease. Posture is usually relaxed, erect, facing forward, facing towards the person with whom they plan to engage. Hands are relaxed, there are warm and smooth motions, and the feet are in a relaxed and comfortable position. So these are some of the verbal and non-verbal tells and the ways to differentiate between these three styles. Okay, so I think we will, because we are not actively engaging in a session right now, so I cannot give you scenarios here. What I would like you guys to do is the scenarios that we used at the very beginning, right? I'd like you guys to take a look at the same scenarios and think of all three ways in which we can communicate, or actually it would be interesting if we can think of 4 ways in which our communication pattern can affect or can show itself in these scenarios, right? So if you were given the wrong payment at the grocery store, what would be the aggressive way of acting in that scenario? What would be the passive way of acting in that scenario? What would be a passive aggressive or manipulative way of acting in that scenario? And what would be the assertive way of acting in that scenario? You ordered fries without ketchup, but you got fries with ketchup. Again, how would you respond aggressively? How would you respond passively? How would you respond in a passive aggressive manner? And how would you respond in a assertive manner? Your plans to watch Spider-Man Homecoming, but the last minute cancellation, and your friend insists they want to watch Twilight. How would you react passively, aggressively, passive aggressively, and assertively? You just got home and are relaxing after a long day at university, but your sibling is coming and telling you to take them to the market. How would you react passively? How would you react aggressively? How would you react in a passive aggressive or manipulative manner? And how would you react in an assertive manner? And lastly, when your teacher has given you an assignment that is to be individually done, but your friend is asking you to share your work, how would you respond aggressively? How would you respond passively? How would you respond passively or passive aggressively or manipulatively? And how would you respond assertively? All right. Okay. So once you're done, I think we get a fairly good idea about where we stand with these styles. Okay, so remember जब हम लोगों ने स्टार्ट में ये बात की थी कि हमने अपना पर्सनल स्टाइल भी आइडेंटिफाई करना है, ठीक है? So we'll get to a little bit more to that. Get to that in a little bit. All right. So what are the benefits of being assertive? Well, assertive people first and foremost like themselves, right? Because they have a solid self-esteem and are in a better position to feel good about themselves than people who are assertive, aggressive, or people who are passive. Passive people may feel used or maybe used to being treated as worthless, and they will have very low self-esteem because of that. Aggressive people may experience a lot of guilt or frustration for their behavior because they have blow-ups that lead to fights with people whom they care about, right? And they may not feel good about themselves either. Okay. So there are several benefits to choosing to act assertively. For example, you can feel better about yourself. People respond better to people, assertive people. Assertive people usually get heard. Assertive people often get what they want. Their anger, frustration, and resentment is reduced. Assertive individuals are more capable of dealing with conflict and arriving at solutions that are mutually acceptable. And they don't feel like their worth is dependent on others. So if somebody is criticizing them, they don't feel annihilated by that and can use that criticism in a productive manner. Okay, so if this assertiveness is so beneficial, why isn't everybody assertive? Well, one of the common reasons for this is that people have some traditional misassumptions about what's right, what's wrong, what's their right, what's selfish, what's mean. So for example, there's an assumption that if you choose yourself, that means you're being selfish, whereas that's not true. There can also be a belief कि क्योंकि हम छोटे हैं तो हमें हर सूरत हाल में बड़े की बात सुननी है, चाहे वो हमारे साथ बहुत disrespectfully बात करें. Whereas the truth is, it is our right to be respected regardless of our age, right? There can also be other things like I have to take care of everybody else, which again is not true. हम अपने रोल के साथ एसोसिएट कर सकते हैं काफ़ी चीज़ें. So there's a thing called the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, I think it has already been shared in the resources जो आप लोगों के साथ शेयर की गई हैं through email. अगर आपको उसमें नहीं मिलती तो you can look it up, Assertiveness Bill of Rights. ठीक है? So you can find a lot of mistaken traditional assumptions and your actual rights. Actually, one of the things that might also people might think कि ये गलत है, but it's actually not wrong, is refusing a request. किसी ने आपसे request किया और आपने कह दिया I can't do that. That's neither being selfish nor being rude. अगर किसी ने आपसे request की है, you have the right to say yes to that request or to say no, and both are equally acceptable answers. And it's not being mean if you refuse a request, right? But a lot of people might think otherwise. So एक चीज तो ये हो गई. दूसरी चीज होती है context. In a collectivistic society like Pakistan's, there are a lot of what do you say, cultural expectations. There's a lot of family और कहाँ पे हो. People behave differently in different contexts. आप हो सकता है अपने work environment में बहुत assertively act करते हो, but in your home environment you might tend to lean more towards maybe the passive style or maybe the aggressive style, right? So context can determine कि आप किस तरह से behave कर रहे हो. Then there's the element of gender. Usually speaking, strictly feminine roles are expected to be more passive, whereas strictly masculine individuals are considered or are encouraged to be more aggressive, right? And people, for instance, if a female is trying to be assertive without being rude, she might be perceived as being aggressive. And a man who's trying to be assertive without being aggressive may be perceived as being passive. So gender can have an influence. Culture, of course, our expectations regarding that, and there are a lot of other factors, right? So just because assertiveness is a style that can help a lot of people doesn't automatically mean that everybody must automatically choose to be assertive in every single scenario. हम day to day, we live in a dynamic environment. हमारी डे टू डे जो रिक्वायरमेंट्स होती हैं, जो इंटरेक्शंस होती हैं, some requirements में we can be assertive, right? But that assertiveness might lead to more problems down the line, and we understand that, so we may choose to be passive. The key point is to understand that we should be aware of our rights. We should know what being aggressive or passive or assertive entails, and then make a conscious decision. So that way, जब हमारा behavior हमारे इख्तियार में होता है और हमारी अपनी choice से होता है, that leads to less frustration and resentment versus if we feel like we are being controlled by outside factors. Okay. All right. So fundamentals of assertive behavior. There are some key points that we need to keep in mind before you decide to be assertive. For one thing, we have to ensure that our environment is safe. ऐसा ना हो कि हम assertive हों तो fights start escalating to the point where we are in physical danger, as can happen with aggressive individuals. See? We also want to be sure कि जिसके साथ हम assertive हो रहे हैं, they have sufficient self-esteem that our being assertive isn't going to negatively impact them, right? So if a person has very low self-worth और वो हमसे request करता है, that takes a lot of courage, and we say no by being assertive, तो हमारे लिए तो assertive होगा, but for the other person that could be actually very detrimental, and we don't want that, right? So you need to be sure कि जिस environment में आप assertive होने का decision ले रहे हो, that environment is actually ready for you to be assertive, right? So it's not going to lead to open hostility, it's not going to harmfully affect others, and it's not going to compromise your safety. If these things, and you have sufficient self-esteem that if you don't succeed the first time, right, तो आप अपने आप को इतना पुट डाउन नहीं करना शुरू कर दोगे that you won't be able to try again. If you are ready for those things and there's a high motivation in you and in the other person to change the behavior, okay, then that's the ideal time for you to start implementing assertive behavior. However, if the other person is not ready to change, तो उसके साथ assertive आप होगे तो you have to be mentally prepared for some lashback. ठीक है? All right. So what are the fundamentals of assertive behavior? Number one thing, communicate when it's important to you. No individual can read your mind. सबसे बड़ा flaw जो हमारे ज़हन में होता है, especially when it comes to family members, friends or couples, we think कि क्योंकि ये person हमारे नज़दीक है, these people know us, they understand us, तो उनको पता होगा कि हमारे दिल में और हमारे दिमाग में क्या चल रहा है. But that's simply not true. Nobody can read our minds. So if we want something, if we think this thing is important enough for us, we must communicate it. Second thing, be direct. And notice, I'm saying direct. I'm not saying rude and I'm not saying blunt. ठीक है? अगर किसी ने आपसे बहुत मान के साथ रिक्वेस्ट की और आप ठक से नो कर देते हो, वो उसके लिए हर्टफुल होगा, right? So you have to be a bit tactful here, but you also have to be direct. You don't have to lead them into false promises. Of course, we can't always take responsibility for the other person's emotions, but we can take responsibility for our tone. So our tone of voice, the way we use our words, इसके जिम्मेदार हम हैं और इसको हमने सही तरीके से यूज करना है. So when we are being direct, we can do that without being rude, without being harsh. ठीक है? बहुत दफे स्पेशली फैमिलीज के अंदर बहस मुबाहिसा हो जाता है, तो उसमें वर्ड्स इन्वॉल्व नहीं होते हैं, बट रादर इट्स द टोन इन विच दोस वर्ड्स आर सेड that are insulting to the other person or that's triggering the other person, right? So directness does not automatically equate to rudeness, and we have to be mindful of that. Third thing, be honest. Say what you mean to say what you honestly feel. What's your honest opinion? That's important. Okay. Treating others with equality and respect. I've already covered this aspect, but it's extremely important for us to realize कि हर इंसान की इज्जत है और उसका हक है तो उसे उस इज्जत के साथ ट्रीट किया जाए. आप जब किसी से बात करते हैं तो whether that person is someone of your immediate circle, or if it's somebody outside of your circle, if it's a young person, if it's an old person, that does not make a difference. What you should be realizing is that as human beings, they deserve our respect, and part of being assertive is being respectful. Fifth thing, taking responsibility for your thoughts and your actions. So just because मुझे ऐसा महसूस हुआ है कि मेरे साथ बदतमीजी की गई है, does not automatically mean कि दूसरे पर्सन की इंटेंशन थी मेरे साथ बदतमीजी करना. So if I am going to take responsibility for my actions or my thoughts, I will say it like this. Your words made me feel, your words made me feel humiliated would be like a you message, right? And I message would be, I felt hurt by your words. Right? So we are not pinning the blame to the other person, but we are just taking responsibility कि मेरे thoughts क्या थे और या मेरे actions क्या थे. If I said something, I am going to take responsibility for those words. If I am going to do something, I am going to take responsibility for that. All right. As an assertive individual, we also have the responsibility to be more positive than negative. It's an easy temptation to give into saying no all the time, right? नहीं नहीं नहीं, आप यूं कर लें, सॉरी कैन डू दैट, आप ऐसा कर सकते हो, कैंट, राइट? And it's very easy to do that when we are being assertive, and I think that's one of the biggest initial threats जो दूसरों को लगती है कि अगर ये person assertive होगा तो ये ऐसा behave करेगा. So it's our responsibility to be more positive than negative. We have to make the decision to say yes as often as we say no. Okay? Being open and responsive to others. So part of being assertive is also allowing for others to put forward their requests and to listen to them and to respect them. Okay? So if a person is reaching out to you, part of your assertiveness routine would be to allow them that leverage, to listen to them and to respond to their reaching out or their efforts to reach out. Okay? All right, so finally to the point where we learn how to be assertive. So first of all, we need to identify कि हमारी existing skills क्या हैं. Are we someone who struggles with asserting our rights, or are we someone who struggles with respecting the rights of others? Right? So once we identify कि हमारा communication pattern क्या है as usual, ठीक है? We can identify कि हमने किस तरह किस direction में work करना है. And how do we identify this? So you have to look into yourself and see कि predominantly in a communication आपकी feelings क्या होती हैं, right? और आपके इर्द-गिर्द के लोगों का रवैया क्या होता है. Those are important indicators. So if you are somebody who's passive, you're more likely to experience frustration, you're more likely to experience hurt, humiliation, you are more likely to experience low moods or low self-esteem or the feeling that you are being taken for granted. And if people around you tell like यार तुम कभी भी हाँ ना नहीं करते हो, तुम कभी अपनी चीज़ों का इजहार नहीं करते हो, या फिर you are just too nice and people take advantage of you, there are high chances that you are somebody who's passive, right? And that means we need to build in the direction of building up your confidence where you can stand up for yourself. If you are on the other side, you're more likely to get comments like यार हर चीज के अंदर लड़ाई ना किया करो, या फिर यार तुम बहुत गुस्सा करते हो, थोड़ा सा रिलैक्स कर जाया करो. या even if they're not saying it, you find yourself to be in the center of arguments most of the time, and a lot of the times you feel regretful कि यार मुझे ऐसा नहीं करना चाहिए था, या फिर you feel guilty maybe I went too far. Then there are high chances that you are operating on the aggressive end of the spectrum. And a good way would be to build down to the level of assertiveness, right? Where you learn to be conscious about the rights of others and make the conscious decision to be respectful in your tone, in your words, in using I messages instead of you messages. Okay? So what are the do's and don'ts of assertiveness? We'll go over the do's and then we'll go over the don'ts. Do say what you think and what you feel. Do use the appropriate body language. Do use a firm tone of voice. Do ask for more time if you need to. Right? हथेली पे सरसों जमाने की जरूरत नहीं है. If you need time to think about something, just ask for it. Clarify what is being asked. If somebody requests something from you and you're not really sure what that means, if you're given an assignment by a teacher but you're not sure what that means, ask about it, clarify it. Okay? Think win-win. When you're thinking for a compromise, when you're looking to find a solution, think of a way in which both you and the other person can achieve what both of you want. Voice the positive. Don't only nitpick on तुमने यूं गलत किया, ऐसा नहीं करना चाहिए था, ये नहीं होना चाहिए था, but also look what is done right. You did this thing very well. I really appreciate how you managed to do this. Think and voice the positive and use I messages. मुझे ऐसा लगता है, मैं ऐसा महसूस करती हूँ. Right? What are the don'ts? Don't go into unnecessary detail. Why is this important? Because अगर हम passive style को देखें, तो passive style में even if we make a small excuse, we usually go into a lot of unnecessary detail as to why we are doing what we are doing, right? So you can say, I am sorry, I can't do it. Or you can say, यार असल में मेरी फलानी जगह पे बहुत ज़्यादा कमिटमेंट है और उसकी वजह से मैं यहाँ से लेके वहाँ तक हूँ और मैं इतने बजे से लेके इतने बजे तक बिजी हूँगा, इस वजह से मैं ये नहीं कर सकता. So both of these are both very different things. You're giving unnecessary justification. It's not needed. You have a right to just say, no, I can't do it, right? So don't go into unnecessary details. You can go into the details that are needed if you feel like it, but you don't absolutely have to. Don't give a lot of excuses. मैं ऐसा नहीं कर सकता क्योंकि यूं है, क्योंकि यहाँ है, ये हो सकता है, right? Don't give that. Just, you've made a decision and that's okay. Don't get sidetracked. दूसरे लोगों की बातों से, दूसरे लोगों के रवैया से, don't get sidetracked from what your goal is, what you were trying to do or what you were trying to say. And lastly, don't use you messages. तुमने ऐसा किया, तुम्हारी वजह से ऐसा हुआ, तुम ऐसा करते तो ऐसा हो जाता. Not that. Assertiveness is about us, not the other people. हमने अपने रवैये की जिम्मेदारी लेनी है. We are not responsible for what the other person's actions are. अगर तुम मेरी बात मान लेते तो मुझे गुस्सा मत चढ़ता. That's a you message. मुझे गुस्सा चढ़ा है. I didn't like this behavior, and I have to be responsible for the anger that I am feeling. And I have to realize कि इसको काबू में करना मेरी जिम्मेदारी है, किसी और की जिम्मेदारी नहीं है. Right? That's important. Alright, so here we have a formula that can be very easily implemented, and especially जब आप at the beginning stage होते हो of assertiveness, it's important to realize that this assertiveness formula can be used. You can just replace the scenarios and use this. So the statement is when you, and then you state the offending behavior in a non-judgmental manner, right? Non-accusatory style में आप सिर्फ उनका behavior बयान करते हो कि जब तुमने ऐसा किया, I feel, मुझे ऐसा महसूस हुआ. Now you disclose your feelings. क्योंकि, because, why do you think कि आपने ऐसा महसूस किया, उसकी वजह से आपकी लाइफ पे क्या इफेक्ट हुआ. And lastly, what do you need out of this? When you're saying कि when I'm saying कि ये मैंने महसूस किया, मैं expect कर रही हूँ कि the other person is going to change. So if I set a meeting and the other person did not come on the allotted time, I can say, when you are not punctual or when you did not adhere to the meeting times, I felt disrespected because I had made special time for you to set that meeting. I want you to be careful next time or to be on time in future. ठीक है? Let's break this down. So when we need to be able to identify a specific behavior that we want to address rather than making a generalized statement. जब तुम बदतमीजी करते हो versus जब तुमने मुझे selfish कहा, ठीक है? So बदतमीज is a general word, तुमने मुझे selfish कहा is very specific. ठीक है? जो रवैया उसने किया, you can give specific examples. So when you say I am lazy, then you are being a jerk. There is a difference. I feel. Now बहुत दफ़ा ऐसा होता है कि हमारा जो सोच होती है हम समझते हैं कि वो हमारी फीलिंग्स हैं. सोचें जो होती हैं वो सेंटेंसेस होते हैं और जो फीलिंग्स होती है वो एक या दो वर्ड्स होते हैं. एक वर्ड होता है मैं खुश महसूस करती हूँ, उदास महसूस करती हूँ, मुझे बुरा लगा, मुझे नागवार गुजरा, मुझे अफसोस हुआ, मुझे बहुत खुशी हुई. समझ रहे हो? एक एक वर्ड्स. I feel hurt versus I think you're trying to hurt me. ठीक? So we have to identify कि हमारा emotion क्या है. So let's go with an example here. जब तुमने मुझसे बदतमीजी की versus जब तुमने मुझे कहा कि मैं selfish हूँ, मुझे महसूस हुआ कि तुम मेरी इज्जत नहीं करते. ये मेरी सोच है. मुझे बुरा महसूस हुआ. ये मेरी फीलिंग है. क्योंकि बिकॉज यहाँ पे हमने स्पेसिफिक इम्पैक्ट बताना है. मुझे क्या महसूस हुआ जब मैंने फील किया, तो उसके पीछे क्या वजह थी. मुझे बुरा महसूस हुआ क्योंकि ये बहुत, मुझे लगा कि तुम मेरी इज्जत नहीं करते. मुझे ये बुरा इसलिए महसूस हुआ. राइट? तुमने मुझे सेल्फिश कहा, मुझे ये बुरा महसूस हुआ क्योंकि मुझे लगा कि तुम मेरी इज्जत नहीं करते, या मुझे लगा कि क्योंकि मैंने तुम्हारे लिए बहुत कुछ किया और मेरे ख्याल में मैं सेल्फिश नहीं हूँ. आई कैन ऑल्सो से दैट. ठीक है? So we have to focus on the impact or the consequence of the behavior on a relationship. So जब तुमने मुझे बदतमीज कहा तो मुझे ये बुरा लगा क्योंकि मुझे लगा कि तुम मेरी इज्जत नहीं करते. What do I want out of this? ये सारी बात तो मैंने स्टेट कर दी है. What do I need the other person to do? I want you to stop calling me बदतमीज. मैं चाहती हूँ कि तुम मुझे आइंदा बदतमीज मत कहो. मैं चाहती हूँ कि आइंदा तुम मुझे सेल्फिश मत कहो. ठीक है? और अगर मैं इसमें थोड़ा जनरलाइज करके कह सकूँ तो स्पेसिफिक नहीं होगा, तो उसमें कह सकते हैं मैं चाहती हूँ कि तुम आइंदा ख्याल रखो. आइंदा ख्याल रखना इज नॉट क्लियर इनफ. ठीक है? सो आई हैव टू बी क्लियर. आई हैव टू बी क्लियर कि मुझे एग्जैक्टली किस चीज़ की रिक्वायरमेंट है फ्रॉम द बिहेवियर. सो आई वॉन्ट यू टू नॉट कॉल मी सेल्फिश अगेन. ठीक है? सो वंस अगेन वही जो 4-5 हमारे पास सिनारियोज हैं, उन 4-5 सिनारियोज में आप असर्टिवनेस फार्मूला को अप्लाई करें. तो टीचर ने आपसे कहा कि आपने इंडिविजुअल असाइनमेंट करनी है, लेकिन आपके फ्रेंड ने इंसिस्ट किया कि आप अपना वर्क शेयर करें. सो when you ask me to share my work, I feel uncomfortable because the teacher has specified that this is an individual assignment. I want you to do your assignment yourself. मैंने एग्जैक्ट वही फार्मूला एज इट इज इस पे अप्लाई कर दिया है. ठीक है। सो इसी तरह जो बाकी सिनेरियोज हैं आप उसमें वो सिनेरियो के प्रैक्टिस अपनी अप्लाई करें। जब आपने ऐसा किया, मुझे ऐसा महसूस हुआ, मैं चाहता हूँ कि आप ऐसे करें। ठीक है। Alright, so we are at the last section of this and I'm just going to go over this very quickly. ठीक है। हम लोग assertiveness की बात करते हैं तो हमने assertively सिर्फ behave नहीं करना, but we are also have some duty to the other person as well. So assertiveness का एक पार्ट तो है कि हम बोलते कैसे हैं, पर दूसरा पार्ट ये है कि हम सुनते कैसे हैं। और सुनने का मतलब ये है कि हमने इस तरीके से दूसरे पर्सन को सुनना है कि हम बिल्कुल ओपनली और नॉन जजमेंटली उसकी बात को सुने। We listen to hear what the other person is saying, not to answer or to defend ourselves. This is very important. बहुत दफे ऐसा होता है कि जब हम बातचीत स्टार्ट करते हैं तो हम दूसरे पर्सन की बात सिर्फ और सिर्फ काउंटर आर्गुमेंट पेश करने के लिए सुन रहे होते हैं कि तुमने ये बात की, इसके पास मेरे पास काउंटर है, तो तुम समझते हो कि तुम मुझे बीट कर सकते हो। बट दैट्स नॉट लिसनिंग, that's not assertive listening. That's listening to counter, right? That's listening to argue. When we are listening assertively, we are listening with an open mind to the point कि अगर दूसरा बंदा हमें convince करेगा तो we will change our opinions. We are genuinely open to what the other person has to say. So number one, we need to prepare. We need to be aware कि हमारी अपनी feelings क्या है, and am I ready to discuss this topic in an open manner? अगर it's a topic that's off limits and I'm not going to listen to the other person, then it's better not to get into an argument about that particular topic, right? Secondly, listen and clarify. When we're listening to the other person, हम सिर्फ अगर passively सुनते रहेंगे but we're not asking any questions for clarification, then naturally the other person may not get the idea that we're listening, right? और बहुत जगह ऐसे हो सकती है जहाँ पे हमें कोई चीज़ clear ना हो. So if we are being assertive about that entire scenario, we would equally ask for clarification. Lastly, acknowledge. You don't have to agree with someone to acknowledge what that they have made a good point, right? Or you can say agree to disagree. हमारे यहाँ ये बड़ा commonly use होता है. But do we understand what we are doing here? है ना? So communicate to the other person that you have actually heard what they're saying and you have heard their position, and you can use the assertiveness formula here as well. ठीक है? Alright. Assertiveness can also be used to avoid being manipulated by other people. ठीक है? Especially if the other person is aggressive, right? You want to say something or do something, the aggressive person will try to convince you, especially if they're aggressive, manipulative or passive aggressive. They might try to convince you कि आप गलत कर रहे हैं and you're making the wrong decision, and they might try to manipulate you into agreeing with them. So how can you avoid that? Well, number one, you can use the broken record technique. And broken record technique is just like getting stuck on a point and keeping repeating and repeating and repeating the same point over and over again. I don't want to do it. Yes, but I don't want to do it. आप सही कह रहे हैं लेकिन मैं इस चीज़ से एग्री नहीं करती. बिल्कुल बजा फरमाया लेकिन मेरा पॉइंट अभी भी वहीं पर है. ब्रोकन रिकॉर्ड बनकर उस चीज़ के ऊपर स्टक हो जाना. सेकेंड थिंग, कंटेंट टू प्रोसेस शिफ्ट. आपने ये बात कही है, कैन यू सी कि हम यहाँ पर क्या कर रहे हैं. आप एक बात कहते हैं और मैं उस बात का जवाब देती हूँ, हम एक आर्ग्यूमेंट में बढ़ गए. सो रादर देन फोकसिंग ऑन कि उस आर्ग्यूमेंट का कंटेंट क्या है, आई एम जस्ट आइडेंटिफाइंग कि हम किस तरह के प्रोसेस में एंगेज कर रहे हैं, एंड दैट कैन डिसएंगेज अस फ्रॉम दैट मैनिपुलेशन, डिफ्यूजिंग. सो वी कैन एग्री टू वन पार्ट ऑफ इट, वन पार्ट ऑफ द स्टेटमेंट जो उसने कही है, एंड नॉट एग्री विद द रेस्ट ऑफ इट. हाँ जी, आपने कहा मैं हमेशा, कोई आपसे कहता है तुम हमेशा लेट होते हो, कभी भी मेरी बात मानते. कह सकते हैं हाँ यकीनन कभी कभी मैं भी लेट हो जाती हूँ. आई एम जस्ट एग्रीइंग टू वन पार्ट ऑफ इट. ठीक है. assertive delay. So if the person is asking you to make a decision right on the spot, you can just assertively delay it. कि ठीक है आपने ये बात कह दी है, I would like to take some time to think about it, ताकि वहीं पे खड़े खड़े आपको मैनिपुलेट करके फैसला ना करवाया जा सके. Assertive agreement. Again, agreeing to only what you think is the right part and not agreeing with the rest of it. Lastly, clouding. Clouding is kind of throwing, muddling things. It's kind of like that. Okay? I'm not going into details with these things because this is beyond the scope of today's training, but these are just some of the tips and techniques. आपके साथ जो resources share की गई हैं, especially the workbook Assert Yourself, उसमें ये जो है techniques in detail discuss की गई हैं. So if you want to find out more on these, I would recommend कि आप उस book को read करें. ठीक है? Alright, lastly, assertive inquiry. And inquiry happens a lot of the times जब हम किसी को confront करते हैं और जो है वो आगे से जवाब देने के बजाय किसी ना किसी तरीके से आपके कंसर्न को डिसमिस करने की कोशिश करते हैं. सो देयर आर सेवरल कॉमन पैटर्न्स जो इधर हैं. जैसे वो दे विल लाफ इट ऑफ, हाँ तुम हर दफ़ा हमें फिजूल बातों पे वरी करते हो. एक्यूजिंग हैबिट, तुमने ऐसा किया था इसकी वजह से ऐसा हुआ. बीट अप, वही बात दोबारा से, ठीक है लेकिन देखो ना तुमने भी तो यूं किया था. डिलेइंग हैबिट, नहीं मैंने अभी इसके बारे में बात नहीं करनी, कल बात करेंगे. और क्यों भाई, मैं क्यों तुम्हें जवाब दूँ. दैट्स ऑल्सो वेरी कॉमन टेक्निक. सेल्फ पिटी, मैं हर दफ़ा तुम्हारे लिए ऐसा करता हूँ उसके बावजूद तुम मुझसे ऐसे कर रही हो. और आर्ग्यूमेंट या कोई ब्लेम और थ्रेट्स, अगर तुमने इसके बारे में बात की तो, राइट. और डिनाइल, मैंने ऐसा कभी भी नहीं किया. So जब हम assertively किसी से inquire करते हैं, these kind of common response patterns can come back, and in order to counter these patterns, we can use the avoiding manipulation techniques. We can use the broken record point, right? And we can get stuck on our question कि नहीं मुझे आप इस चीज़ का जवाब दे. या we can use the content to process shift कि जब मैं आपसे सवाल करती हूँ आप आके हंस के टालने की कोशिश करते हैं ये क्या हो रहा है. And you will still bring it to confrontation, ठीक है. Or you can get them to agree with you कि वो at least किसी point पे आपके साथ बात करेंगे, ठीक है. So that way we can use assertiveness in our inquiry as well, right. So this is it for assertiveness on my part. I hope कि इसमें आप लोगों की clarity हो गई हो. Unfortunately, because this isn't a live session, तो मैं आप लोगों को questions नहीं ले सकती. However, if after this video you have some questions, I would like कि आप लोग उसको comments में ज़रूर लिख दें, ठीक है. And as soon as possible हमारी ये कोशिश होगी कि हम इन comments को address कर सकें. Thank you for joining me and Allah Hafiz.